perhaps anybody else around. An inspirational figure on both sides of the Atlantic. One of the few American architects who's managed to get through thus far the convolutions of the French procurement system to be producing what will be one of the most extraordinary buildings in Paris, out at La Défense, a really amazing tower. And I think the range and variety of the work that he was done, the last building of his I saw was a transportation centre in Los Angeles, and there is a kind of freshness and dynamism about this architecture which has won friends, I think, across the world. Liz Diller, I met in London doing a lunchtime presentation we were recalling yesterday about the Lincoln Centre, one of those flying visits that public relations people in the art and museum world like to. They think it's efficient to have somebody giving a lecture while a lot of other people are eating. Nevertheless, it was a wonderful explanation of that project and others. And Liz coped admirably with a clash of cutlery on China. In the biographical notes, it describes Diller and Scorfidio as a maverick firm, and I think maverick is a kind of interesting word, because I just think, again, they're an inspirational practice. I don't think there's anything maverick about them at all. It's just that they take complex and sometimes highly unusual projects and turn them into something which has lessons for other architects. Now, taking Jeff's point this morning, which I think is a profound one. I mean, most people look at buildings or use buildings. It doesn't mean that they have any obligation to be interested in architecture as architecture, or indeed to understand it, any more than people who read a newspaper need to understand about journalism, or people who read a novel need to understand about literature. But in a sense, what I think is interesting, and in looking at the work of these two architects, which is not, one might say, normal backdrop architecture, it's sort of special architecture, it nevertheless forms part of that inevitable backdrop of the lives that we all lead. So first up, Tom Mayne.
The future doesn't exist. We haven't even found the present. And our job today is to question how we construct that present that leads to our future. And it requires a radical engagement, a connection, and it's the dilemma of the profession. And I have to say, my colleagues, especially the colleagues in this country, I think it's especially an American problem, where the best and the brightest, the talent, the architectural talent, is so unengaged in the relationship of constructing our environment and participating in the broader issues, whether they be urban, infrastructural, et cetera. And it's vital today that we change that. Last night, when we were having dinner, it was mentioned by one of the people earlier, we were with your former mayor and Cheryl Franklin. And it was really interesting. Over dinner, we were discussing multiple presents, multiple notions of, well, in her case, finding a constituency of what represents reality, what represents the nature of who we are today. And I reminded her, I was just reading a little piece in the New York Times on my flight in yesterday, and it had something to do with a set of issues that are taking place in the state, having to do with changing textbooks, and the fight about Darwinism. And I'm going, oh dear, of course. We have, I think statistically, over half of the people in this country that aren't yet convinced of Darwin or Einstein or Freud, et cetera. Well, we're already a century and a half, plus minus, in that argument. And she shrugged her shoulders and said, well, I think she mentioned even, somebody asked her if she was going to go for state government, and she said she was far too liberal to kind of move out of the city. And it had to do with these kind of broader issues of the dilemma a constituency, that he can make some of the most basic kind of discussions of kind of what this culture is about at this time. I'm going to start an image that had to do with my youth, because as I grew up as a young man, the future was a very vibrant idea, structure. And it was, of course, connected to post-World War kind of issues in the United States and our economic dominance and an immense energy given to innovation and to a hope and some sort of an agreement of our position in the world and in the ascent of that position within cultural, social, economic, political terms. And one could somehow agree that this notion, as it was connected to ideas of progress and potentially even different notions of utopian ideas, that it was somehow useful. And I came across a little thing I'd written a while ago, and it was a piece on Tom Watson, who was a CEO of IBM, and he was quoted in 1944. And 1944 was the year I was born, as talking about computers, and he said, "Computers of the future may weigh less than 1.5 tons." That's in my lifetime, that's subtracting 50 pounds a year, if you're interested. And that, of course, we've realized that anticipatory planning, the notion of prediction, is absolutely defunct. I came out of when I came out of school, I worked with Victor Gruen Associates, and he was one of the more kind of erudite planners in the country. And we were doing what was called anticipatory end-state planning. And he recognized in the middle 70s that it was an absolutely defunct idea, and that we could no longer anticipate and predict systems in the way that they were talking about. And of course, this notion of the future was very much part of our real lives as we were part of this, the exploring the universe, and it was absolutely compelling. I'm in my teens here. I'm 13 or 14 years old. And of course, with that came the other side of the coin. And we were also very much involved in the relationship of the power of nuclear weapons and its effect on our house. And again, I lived in a community that were building, well, it was kind of a poor community, so there were a few bunkers. And in fact, the conversation quickly kind of moved to everyone knew where the bunkers were, so we were all going to kind of inhabit the people that had money to build the bunkers and store canned food and water and all that. But I lived during that era, and the motto was RAND Corporation. Think the unthinkable was the. No one didn't understand that idea. And then, of course, speaking of the un-utopian, I've lived personally through realities that made my life. This is my photograph of the Watts riots, 24 hours plus minus after the occurrence. And it was just about my neighborhood. I was at USC at the time. And this was 3 or 4 blocks away. And I went through this extremely kind of interesting process in Sarajevo. Lebbeus Woods invited a group of us to teach, and I failed to kind of understand that the shooting wasn't over. And they were still taking shots at us, and this is the magazine that came out of that experience. And then, of course, more recently, all of us are aware of this continuation of conflict, let's say, and a kind of an understanding of the nature of that as part of our day-to-day lives. And the notion of conflict or stability or certainty is something I'm interested in. And so whether it is a geopolitical problem or whether it's one that's part of our natural world, we understand intrinsically that we live under a series of dynamic forces, and those forces have huge power to inform us, to inform the nature of how we construct that reality. And in my case, I find it just extremely useful in terms of understanding the dynamicism, which in fact leads to certain notions of built environment. Well, there's another kind of parallel to this, which is within the cultural sphere, and it has to do with ambiguity. And again, I'm somebody that now is very much influenced by the hybrid with Venturi. I'm now in my young 20s, and it was a piece of work that had huge, huge power over me. And of course, whether I'm living in, I come from Indiana, and I grew up outside of Chicago, and then I've lived in LA and the various parts of LA since I was a young child. And this is daily life. I've weight trained at Gold's Gym as a young guy in Venice, California. It's just my life. And so I looked at this, when I saw this photograph, and I've used it for now quite a while, I'm fascinated with every aspect of this environment, whether it's gender, whether it's class structure, whether it's ethnicity. Everything about this photograph represents the world we live in, and I'm completely comfortable with this world. Well, this notion of authenticity also challenges reality, and this figure, this character, everybody knows this person, and it's, of course, Conan the Barbarian. And, well, he could be the Terminator, he could be the governor of my state, but he's really understood as, of course, Conan. And today, the notion of reality is something which is in play, and again, hugely affects the notion of our work and how we construct that reality. And well, it's gone mainstream because today everybody knows that there's no such thing as nature. There's only the nature of nature, and we reconstruct every aspect of our living world that starts with the human figure. Well, there's a disagreement towards, at this point of time, of progress, or the notion of our trajectory, and I found this quite appropriate in terms of one of the potential trajectories that would go back to my conversation with your ex-mayor last night, and that you could assume, if you, for instance, are an avid Fox television viewer, that this is very possibly today's reality as we move into kind of a Luddite-ish kind of phase of evolution. And many of us, many out there, are betrayed by this notion of this loss of certainty, and are a bit lost. And we are involved at this present time in a world that seems to be more and more difficult. And I say world, I'm talking more about America, about the U.S. of A., but a time when there seems to be a lostness or an inability to ask appropriate questions or insightful questions having to do with the nature of presence. Okay, I need a kind of piece in between here. There's a kind of shift here as I'm going to move to work. But one of the aspects that I can locate is the radical kind of shift of the human figure and our relationship to the world, and from this to this, and let me see, can I? Today, we understand the human figure within biological terms, and whether it's the endocrine or the lymphatic or the cardiovascular or the skeleton or the nervous, etc., we understand the human character in terms of the multiple systems of that environment. What I really need here that I don't have is I need the same diagram as a biological model, because what's much more interesting to